The grand hall buzzed with the hum of guests whispering behind veiled smiles, the soft clink of glasses mingling with the distant chatter of a wedding about to begin. In the center, standing at the altar, a woman dressed in a wedding gown, poised and ready to give herself away, smiled nervously. Her name was Ilara, an Omega burdened with the curse of her lineage, and today she was supposed to be married to the man she thought she loved. The priest began his ritual, the words hanging in the air like an ominous omen. Yet, as Ilara opened her mouth to speak her vows, the doors of the hall suddenly swung open with a force that sent a ripple of shock through the room. A stranger stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, an aura of raw power emanating from him. His eyes met Ilara's, and something inexplicable, shifted in her chest. The room fell silent. "Ilara," the stranger said, his voice deep and firm. "You don't belong here." She froze, unable to tear her gaze away from him. Who was this man? Ilara's heart skipped a beat as her body refused to move. The man's presence was undeniable, like a shadow cast over everything she knew. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see through her very soul. The priest stammered, unsure of what to do, while the guests began to murmur, confusion spreading through the crowd. Ilara could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but all she could do was stare at the stranger, as if he held her in place. She was the cursed Mega, bound by a fate she didn't ask for. Yet this man, this stranger, was doing something to her. "What do you want?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I came to set you free," he said, his gaze unyielding. The guests shifted uneasily, some casting uncertain glances at each other, while others remained frozen, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Ilara's mind raced. She was an Omega, a lowly being in this society, cursed to be bound by the whims of fate. And yet this stranger spoke of freedom, as though it were a mere touch away. The room seemed to close in on her. She could feel the weight of the curse, the years of her family's shackles pressing on her chest. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately, his eyes locking with hers, as if debating whether to reveal the truth. "I am the one who will break your curse," he said at last, stepping forward. With a kiss. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as the man closed the distance between them. She wanted to run, to hide, to scream, anything to break the strange hold he had on her. But her body betrayed her. Her feet remained rooted to the ground. The air around them thickened, and the tension was unbearable. The stranger's gaze never wavered from hers, his eyes filled with something she couldn't understand, an ancient knowing, a deep hunger. "Don't you want to be free?" he asked softly, his voice like a caress. The words broke through her fog. "Free? No." "Yes," Ilara whispered, her voice shaking. "But how?" He smiled slightly, almost knowingly, before he cupped her face gently. "A kiss," he repeated. "A kiss to set you free." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, torn between the years of fear and oppression she had endured, and the strange new sensation that was blooming inside her. The stranger's presence was overpowering, yet she could feel a strange connection forming between them. Was this truly the answer to the curse that had shackled her for so long? Could a single kiss set her free? She was terrified, but part of her deep inside, was willing to risk it. Without thinking, her hand reached up, brushing against his. The action startled her, but it was as if some deep part of her knew this was right. He leaned down, his lips just inches from hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a mere whisper. Ilara closed her eyes, nodding slightly. "Yes." Ilara's heart raced as the stranger's lips hovered just above hers. The air between them crackled with tension like a storm about to break. Her thoughts were scattered, racing in every direction. Could she truly trust him? Could she trust anyone, after everything she had endured? The curse she bore weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of her place in this world. She had never known freedom, never known a life outside the bonds of her status. And now, here he was, offering her something she could scarcely believe: freedom. A future, beyond the curse that had held her captive. The man's gaze softened, sensing her inner turmoil. "You don't have to fear me," he whispered, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm here to help you." Elara's breath caught. "But how?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. His eyes darkened with intensity. "With a kiss. One kiss, and the curse will be lifted." For a long moment, nothing moved. The room seemed to hold its breath, the world around them fading into the background. Elara's mind whirled, thoughts crashing like waves against her senses. She was an Omega, cursed to be less than human in the eyes of society. Her life had been one of obedience, of subjugation, and now, here was a man telling her that all of that could end with a single act, a kiss. It felt unreal. The weight of her heritage, her past, pressed on her chest, and she fought the urge to push him away. But deep down, a part of her longed for this freedom, for the release that only he seemed able to offer. Slowly, her eyes opened, and for the first time she truly looked at him. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice cracking. The stranger gave a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to be." With that, he closed the gap between them and kissed her, tenderly but with undeniable intent. The moment their lips met, Elara felt a surge of something inside her, something powerful and raw. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the energy that seemed to flow between them, a spark igniting something long dormant within her. For a second, everything else faded away. The guests, the wedding, the life she had known. It was as though time itself had stopped. In that single kiss, she felt something crack, something break free. She pulled back just slightly, her breath uneven, her heart hammering in her chest. "Do you feel it?" the stranger asked, his voice thick with emotion. Elara nodded, her lips still tingling from the kiss. "Yes, what was that?" "The curse," he said quietly. "It's already beginning to break." Elara stood frozen, her body still tingling from the kiss. The strange sensation of freedom was overwhelming, a flood of emotions she couldn't process. She had spent so long hiding from her own desires, from her own power, that the sudden release felt like a rush of air after being submerged for too long. The stranger looked at her with a mixture of reassurance and hope. "It's only the beginning," he said softly, his voice steady. "You've carried this curse long enough. Let me help you carry the burden no more." For the first time in years, Elara felt as though she could breathe, as if the weight of her past had been lifted, even if just a little. She could feel something shifting within her, like a door creaking open. "I don't know if I can fully believe it yet," she said quietly. "But I want to." He smiled. "Then trust me, Elara. Trust that this is only the first step." The quiet hum of the room slowly returned, but Elara's world felt utterly different. She glanced around the hall, the guests still staring at her, oblivious to the monumental change that had just taken place. The curse was beginning to break, and yet, part of her wondered if she could truly embrace this new reality. Could she really live without the chains that had bound her for so long? Was she strong enough to walk away from everything she knew? The stranger's presence beside her was grounding, but she still felt adrift, unsure of what the future held. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The stranger's gaze softened. "Now, you begin to reclaim what is yours. The curse will no longer control you. You are free." Elara stood in the garden, the cool night air caressing her face as she gazed up at the stars. The kiss had unlocked something deep inside her, something she couldn't explain. She had never felt so free, yet so conflicted. It was as though the veil that had clouded her life was lifting, and in its place, uncertainty settled. She had known nothing but the curse, the constraints of her identity, and now that it was breaking, she didn't know how to step forward. "I don't know how to live like this," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Behind her, the stranger appeared, his presence strong yet comforting. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "But it's all so new, so overwhelming," she confessed. "Then take it one step at a time," he replied. "You'll find your way." Elara's gaze dropped to the ground. She wanted to believe him, but doubts gnawed at her. Could she truly escape the past that had shaped her so deeply? Days passed, but the unease within Elara remained. The curse had loosened its grip on her, but society's expectations were still a heavy burden. In the palace halls she overheard whispers. Her presence was no longer as invisible as it had once been. They spoke of her strange sudden transformation, of her association with the mysterious stranger who had come to break the curse. People were watching her, waiting for her to stumble. I should leave, Elara thought to herself as she walked through the halls. They'll never accept me as I am now. Her footsteps echoed in the marble corridor. But just as she turned a corner, she collided with a familiar figure. Watch where you're going, said a cold voice. It was Cassandra, one of the higher-ranking women in the court, and her eyes were filled with disdain. So, the cursed Omega thinks she's better now, does she? Elara's heart sank. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Her past was not easily forgotten. Don't you dare forget where you came from, Elara, Cassandra sneered, her words slicing through the air like a knife. You will always be an Omega, no matter what tricks that man performed on you. Elara flinched, the harshness of the words sinking deep into her heart. For a moment she felt small again, the weight of her past wrapping around her like chains. But then she remembered the feeling of freedom, the sensation of release she had experienced. She was no longer that helpless Omega, the one who had been bound by her family's curse. I'm not who I was, Elara said firmly, lifting her chin in defiance. Cassandra laughed, her voice mocking. You think that man can change you? You'll always be beneath us. Elara's hands curled into fists, and though the sting of Cassandra's words lingered, she refused to back down. The stranger had freed her, but only she could decide what to do with that freedom. Elara's encounter with Cassandra lingered in her mind for days. The woman's words echoed in her ears, reminding her of her lowly place in the world, despite the changes she was undergoing. She could feel the eyes of the court on her, curious, judgmental, and unforgiving. The stranger who had once been her beacon of freedom was becoming a distant figure in her life. He had given her the chance to be free, but now, it was up to her to make that freedom real. As Elara wandered through the palace gardens again, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. Could she truly forge a new life, free from the curse, when the world still saw her as nothing more than an Omega? She didn't have an answer. But as the breeze rustled the trees, she knew one thing: she was no longer willing to be defined by her past. It was time to make her own path. I will prove them wrong, she whispered to herself, her voice full of quiet resolve. Elara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, her heart torn between the desire for freedom and the fear of rejection. She had come so far, yet the path ahead seemed just as uncertain as it had been before. The stranger had broken her curse, but now it was her responsibility to break free of the world's expectations. That evening, as she sat alone in her chambers, a knock came at the door. Enter, Elara called softly. The door opened, and there stood the stranger. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, Elara felt a flicker of relief. You've been distant, he observed, his voice gentle yet full of concern. Elara looked up at him, her gaze steady but heavy with the weight of her thoughts. I don't know what to do anymore. The world doesn't see me the way you do. They still see the curse, and I don't know how to escape it. The stranger's expression softened, and he took a step closer. You've already begun to escape it, Elara. Don't let them define you. You are more than what they see. The days after the stranger's visit were filled with uncertainty. Elara could feel the world pressing in on her, the whispers and cold stares of the court growing more intense as the rumors spread. The freedom she had tasted was slipping through her fingers like water. She had tried to stay strong, but every moment seemed to bring a new challenge. The weight of the expectations from her family and the court felt unbearable, and she found herself questioning everything once more. As Elara stood alone in the library, the old bookshelves towering around her like silent witnesses, a letter arrived. She unfolded it slowly, her heart sinking as she read the words. Your curse was never truly broken. It was only delayed. The blood drained from her face. The words felt like a lie, but the nagging fear in her heart told her otherwise. Was this all a trick? Suddenly she heard a voice behind her, low and familiar. The truth is more complicated than you think, Elara. Elara spun around, her heart racing, as the stranger stepped out of the shadows. His expression was unreadable, his presence commanding as always. But there was something different about him now. Something distant in his gaze that made her uneasy. You knew about this, didn't you? Elara demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. You knew that the curse was never truly gone. The stranger sighed, running a hand through his hair. The curse is more complex than you understand. It's not just a spell that can be lifted with a kiss. It's woven into your very essence. Elara took a step back, her mind reeling. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? I was trying to protect you, he said quietly, stepping closer. I never meant for you to feel betrayed, but there's something you need to know about your true power. Something I didn't fully understand either. Elara felt a chill run down her spine as the stranger's words hung in the air. The truth he was about to reveal made her blood run cold. You're not just an Omega, Elara, he continued, his voice quieter now, almost regretful. The curse that bound you was only part of the story. Your bloodline is tied to something much older, something darker. She blinked, struggling to process what he was saying. What are you talking about? Your family, he began slowly, is cursed, yes, but not in the way you think. The power that resides within you is not a simple affliction. It's a gift, one that can either save or destroy this world. Elara's head swam with confusion. A gift? She whispered, disbelieving. How can something that has tormented me for so long be a gift? The curse wasn't just a punishment. It was a test, the stranger explained, to see if you could control the power that runs through your veins. But now, the true challenge begins. Elara's mind raced as the weight of the stranger's words settled in. A gift? Her entire life had been defined by her curse, by the oppression and the limitations it imposed on her. How could this power that had tortured her be a gift? She had always felt like less, always hidden in the shadow of those who were stronger, those who were not cursed like her. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. How can I control something that's been destroying me all this time? The stranger stepped forward, his presence looming large, as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Because you were never meant to hide from it, Elara. You were meant to harness it. Elara shook her head, the thought too overwhelming to grasp. And what happens if I can't control it? What if it destroys everything? Then you'll have to face the consequences, he said, his voice hardening. But you are stronger than you think. You've always been. The room seemed to close in around Elara as the reality of her situation hit her like a wave. Her past, her family, her curse, all of it had led her to this moment. She wasn't just an Omega, an outcast. She was something far greater, something capable of shaping the fate of the world. What do I do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's eyes softened. Now, you embrace your power. You stop running from it, stop hiding from the truth. You're not alone in this, Elara. You never were. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling at her sides. This was the moment of choice. She could embrace the power that had haunted her for so long, or continue to live in the shadows, a prisoner of her own fear. With a quiet resolve, Elara lifted her head, her gaze steady. I will control it, she said, her voice gaining strength. I will not let it control me. The days leading to the confrontation felt like a lifetime. Elara knew the time had come to face the full extent of the power within her, the power that had been buried for so long. She stood before the palace gates, the wind whipping through her hair, as the army gathered on the horizon. She had seen the signs. Dark forces were gathering, threatening everything she had ever known. It wasn't just about breaking her curse anymore. It was about saving everything she loved. I didn't choose this, she murmured to herself, her fingers tightening around the hilt of a sword that felt foreign in her hand. The stranger appeared beside her, his expression grave. Sometimes we don't choose our battles, Elara, but we choose how we fight them. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with resolve. I won't run anymore. The stranger nodded, his eyes reflecting the same determination. You never were meant to. With that, Elara stepped forward, the weight of the coming battle heavy on her shoulders. The battlefield stretched before them, a sea of armed soldiers, their eyes filled with hate and fear. Elara had gathered her strength, her resolve steeled, but she knew that what she faced was far more than just an external fight. The curse had never been just a spell. It was a reflection of the darkness within herself, the fear, the pain, the anger she had hidden for so long. She lifted her sword, her heart pounding. She felt the power surge through her veins, a wild and uncontrollable force. I'm ready, she whispered to the stranger who was now beside her on the field. Are you? He asked, his voice low. Because the battle ahead isn't just against them. It's against yourself. Elara nodded, the weight of his words settling in. The battlefield was more than just an army. It was the battle for her soul. And she was ready to face it. With a fierce cry she charged forward, the power within her bursting forth in a wave of energy. The clash of metal rang in the air as Elara fought, her sword cutting through enemies with a force she had never known she possessed. But, as the battle raged on, she felt a deep, gnawing fear at the core of her being. It wasn't just the enemies before her, it was the power within her, wild and untamed, threatening to consume her. The stranger's voice rang out from somewhere behind her, but she couldn't hear him over the roar of battle. You have to control it, Elara, don't let it control you. But how? The question screamed in her mind as her sword cleaved through another opponent. She could feel the power surging in waves, and every swing of her blade seemed to release more of it, faster, fiercer. In that moment of chaos, she understood. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for control over the power that threatened to unravel everything. With a deep breath she focused, bringing the power into herself, channeling it through her sword. The battle had shifted, the enemy's forces beginning to falter in the face of Elara's relentless power. But as the fighting slowed she felt it. A deep, painful connection to the enemy. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The true enemy wasn't just the soldiers she faced. It was the darkness within herself, the part of her that had always believed she was incapable of true change. She dropped to her knees, the sword falling from her hand as the power within her surged uncontrollably. The battlefield around her seemed to blur, her vision clouded. Elara, the stranger shouted, rushing to her side. Focus, you control it, or it controls you. His words cut through the chaos, and Elara, trembling, reached deep within herself. She saw the truth. Her greatest enemy had always been the fear of what she could become. With a final determined breath, she rose, her power contained, her mind focused. The battle was not over yet, but she was ready to face it. The air was still, the battlefield quiet now, save for the distant cries of those still struggling. Elara stood tall, her sword raised once more, the power within her now a part of her, no longer a force of destruction but of purpose. The darkness that had once threatened to consume her was now a part of her strength. As the last of the enemy forces fell, Elara lowered her sword, her breathing heavy but steady. The battle was won, but it was more than that. It was a victory over the darkness within herself. The stranger approached her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with something like pride. You did it, he said softly. Elara nodded, her face solemn. I didn't just fight for the world. I fought for myself. The stranger placed a hand on her shoulder. And you've proven that you can control it. Elara looked out over the battlefield, the weight of the world now lighter on her shoulders. She had faced her demons and emerged stronger. There was no going back, but there was no need. She had found her path. Elara stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the warm light of the setting sun casting a golden hue across the landscape. The battle was over, and peace had returned to the land, but it didn't feel like the end. It was the beginning of something new. She had faced the darkness within her, fought for control, and emerged victorious, but now she had to find a way to live in the aftermath. Behind her, the soft footsteps of the stranger echoed in the quiet. "It's over," he said, his voice low but filled with the weight of the moment. Elara nodded, but there was still a sense of unease in her heart. "It's over. But what now?" The stranger stood beside her, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "Now you build. You shape your future. You are no longer bound by the past." Elara turned to him, her eyes searching his. "And you? Will you stay with me?" He looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'll always be here, but this is your path now." As days turned into weeks, Elara worked to rebuild the world around her, not through battle or violence, but through understanding and healing. The people who had once feared her began to see the change in her, not just the absence of the curse, but the strength she had found within herself. It wasn't easy, and the weight of leadership sometimes felt like too much to bear, but Elara embraced it. One evening, as she stood in the palace gardens, the stranger appeared again, his presence steady and calming. "You've done it," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Elara turned to him, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "I haven't done it alone." The stranger nodded. "You never were alone." "I know," she said softly. "And now, I can see it. My path. It's mine to walk. I don't have to fear it anymore." The stranger placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze warm. "That's the first step." One day, as Elara sat in the courtyard, listening to the murmurs of her people, she felt something stir within her, a deeper sense of belonging. The curse had always been a source of shame, but now it was a part of her story, one that no longer defined her, but shaped her. She had learned that the power she once feared was not just a curse, it was the key to her strength. But even as she sat among her people, there was a part of her that remained restless, always looking toward the horizon, wondering if her journey had truly ended. The stranger appeared once again, this time without words, only the presence of his gaze. He stood beside her, and for a moment, they shared the silence. "Is this where I belong?" Elara asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. The stranger met her gaze, his eyes filled with understanding. "You belong exactly where you are. But you must decide what comes next." Elara looked out at the horizon, a quiet resolve settling in her heart. She wasn't done yet, there was more to her journey, and she would face it with the same strength she had found. As the months passed, Elara's leadership grew stronger, and the people's faith in her was unwavering. The land began to heal, not just from the battles fought, but from the wounds of the past. Elara had learned to balance her power, embracing both her light and her darkness, understanding that neither could exist without the other. One evening, as she stood in the palace courtyard, looking up at the stars, the stranger appeared once more. This time, he didn't say a word. He simply stood beside her, and together they watched the night unfold. "The world is changing," Elara said softly, her voice a gentle whisper. "Yes," the stranger replied, his voice calm. "But you have already changed it, one step at a time." Elara turned to him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "No, Elara. Thank yourself. You've done this. You were always meant to." As Elara gazed at the horizon, a sense of peace settled over her. The world had changed, and she had changed with it. She no longer feared the power within her, nor the future that lay ahead. The battles she had fought were no longer about survival. They were about growth. And as she stood there, she realized that the greatest battle was never against the world around her. It was against the doubts that had once held her back. She turned to the stranger, her heart full of gratitude. "I'm ready for what comes next." He nodded, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "Then let's walk forward together." Elara smiled, for the first time feeling like she truly belonged. The future was uncertain, but with the strength she had found within herself, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. The kingdom flourished under Elara's leadership. The people no longer whispered in fear. They spoke of hope. But as Ilara stood before her people, a leader no longer bound by the chains of her past, she felt an unfamiliar emptiness deep within her. The power she had once feared, the power that had broken her curse, now felt like an old friend. A friend who had walked beside her through the darkest days, but who now, for reasons unknown, seemed distant. The stranger stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes fixed on her, waiting, watching. She could feel his gaze, the weight of the connection between them. "Is it enough?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. The stranger approached, his voice low and reassuring. "You have done more than enough, Ilara." She turned to him, searching his face for answers, for clarity. "Then why do I feel so lost?" He smiled gently. "Because your journey is not over, Ilara. It never was." Later that evening, Ilara found herself wandering the palace halls, alone with her thoughts. The weight of leadership had grown heavy, but the longing for something more, something deeper, tugged at her heart. The world had changed, but so had she. And while the people now saw her as their queen, Ilara couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that she wasn't quite done with the path she had begun so long ago. The stranger appeared beside her, as if he had sensed her inner turmoil. "You're still searching for something, aren't you?" Ilara nodded, her eyes downcast. "I've given everything to this kingdom. I fought for it, bled for it. But now, I feel as though something is missing." "Not all battles are fought with swords, Ilara," he said softly. "Some are fought within." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "And what if I'm not ready to face it?" He smiled gently. "You've already faced it. The question is, what will you do with what you've learned?" The next morning, Ilara stood at the edge of the palace balcony once again, looking out over her kingdom. The landscape stretched before her, beautiful, peaceful, and yet somehow incomplete. There was so much she had fought for, so much she had gained, but it felt like something was still missing. She felt the stranger's presence behind her, his voice carrying a familiar comfort. "You've built something remarkable here, Ilara." She nodded, but there was a question in her heart she couldn't voice. "It's not enough, is it?" He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "It's never enough, Ilara, but that's what makes life worth living." Ilara turned to him, a small smile forming on her lips. "And what now? What comes next for me?" "The same as always," he said, his eyes filled with warmth. "You choose. And you keep walking one step at a time." The kingdom continued to thrive, and Ilara found herself leading with a wisdom she never thought she would possess. But as her strength grew, so did her awareness of the subtle complexities of power. It was no longer just about fighting for what was right, it was about finding balance in a world that demanded so much. One evening, as Ilara sat alone in her chambers, she thought about the past, how far she had come from the cursed Omega she once was. The stranger appeared at her door, his figure framed by the soft light from the hallway. "You're thinking again," he said with a knowing smile. Ilara looked up, her face serene. "I wonder if I will ever stop." He stepped inside, his voice soft. "It's not the thinking that matters, Ilara, it's the living." She smiled, a true smile, the weight of her journey finally settling in her heart. "Then I'll live." And for the first time, Ilara knew she was ready for whatever came next. Ilara stood at the edge of the palace grounds, her gaze on the horizon as the sun dipped below the earth. It had been a long journey, one that had changed her in ways she could never have imagined. But now, as she stood on the precipice of the unknown, she knew that this was only the beginning. "Do you ever wonder what's beyond all of this?" she asked, her voice soft, barely audible. The stranger stood beside her, looking out with her. "Always," he replied. "But that's the beauty of it. You never truly know what's ahead, and that's what makes every step worth taking." Ilara smiled, a soft, contented smile. "I think I've found my peace," she whispered. The stranger glanced at her, a faint smile of his own. "Then you're ready." Together they turned toward the future, the world at their feet, uncertain but full of possibility.